Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you, a big, big thank you to the center for hosting us, having this screening, and allowing us to do this Q&A. For us, when we make these films, we don't often get to engage with people in the communities that are at the center of these stories. And for us, it's really important to create discourse around these stories because, I think the whole point is to help educate people and inspire people to create change where change is needed. So thank you all for being here. A big thank you to HBO for supporting us and telling these stories. I think we're living our dreams and telling these stories, and we feel they're very important, especially in the time that we're in right now. Very quickly, before we introduce the panel, I wanted to introduce the team who made this all possible. So Nicole, the producer, Madeline Peters, Hendrik Kinzel, Marina Stadler. You guys should stand up and wave. Tyler Hart, Paula Salhaney, who edited this piece. Paula edited this piece and did a beautiful job, and Beverly Chase, our supervising producer. So great job, you guys, and thank you for your tireless work. So it is our pleasure to introduce Ali Bellin, who is the Transgender HIV Prevention Coordinator at the Center, and Regina Schaefer, who is a parent of a transgender youth and also the Director of Social Work at the Legal Aid Society. Come on up. I just wanted to start first. Nicole and I obviously worked very closely on this project for the better half of a year, but I don't think I've ever asked you this. Why did you decide to do this film? You could have pitched a story, any story, anywhere in the world. Why this one?
Well, like you mentioned in the beginning, it certainly felt like the right time to be telling a story like this. We started working on this season early last year, and it was right when the kind of debate around bathrooms was first kicking off. So it felt like an important moment to look at issues that are facing the trans community. Obviously, we couldn't predict how very timely this would be or that the debate would still kind of be going as intensely as it is right now. But obviously, the story quickly became about more than that. And I felt like as soon as we started talking to people in the community, to kids and their families, I was really blown away by how children and teens were just so thoughtful and reflective and kind of honest about their experiences, both the good and the challenges. And I think that has a lot to do with constantly having to educate the people around them, from their peers to their own teachers to their extended family. And it makes for people who are telling incredible and compelling stories, and it felt like an important moment to be showing that.
What was really refreshing about interviewing children is that their perspective is so pure. They're not influenced by media or what their friends or family or other people are talking about. They just make the points a lot stronger, I think, because they're just a lot more simple in many ways.
Yeah, and I felt like these kids in particular, remembering how I was when I was going through puberty or when I was a teenager, I was definitely not that self-aware or able to speak about my experiences in the same way that they are. So it was definitely very impressive.
Ali, if I could ask you, I think as we all know, last night the Trump administration reversed the Obama directive on bathrooms, which is a significant setback. What are the biggest current concerns right now in the transgender community?
I feel like that's a very large question that will probably take more time than we have, to be really honest. I think the bathrooms right now it encompasses so many things about how the transgender non-conforming community are oppressed, but it's the thing that is the easiest to show people because it's so basic, right? Like, it's the thing that we take for granted, going to the bathroom. But when there's no space for you to go to the bathroom, you have to hold it. And if you can think about what it means to have to hold going to the bathroom through a work day or through a class, 7 or 8 hours, like, that creates a lot of medical issues and discomfort. It means that you can't be present. And when you are not present in spaces, it means that it has like so many repercussions. And so I think that when we're talking to folks who don't necessarily want to have a conversation about trans and gender nonconforming rights because they think that they're special, bathrooms is the most basic way to say, like, this is like really basic stuff.
We talked about this a little bit in the piece, just the idea of, is this just about bathrooms or is it about something more? Can you speak to that a little bit? And I guess specifically, and we did a different piece last year, actually, that Hendrik and I worked on, where we touched on this a little bit, but what is the effect on a child or some of the young people that you work with when they see their government making announcements like this? We talked about this after the SCOTUS ruling last year, and before that, when states weren't moving to legalize same-sex marriage and how that affected children. Can you talk a little bit about the effects of children, seeing those announcements?
I think it sends a clear message that they don't matter. And I think as a youth, as a trans or gender nonconforming youth, and then you have all the other intersections that come into place, right? Like you have race, you have immigration status. And I think that all of those things together from a government that is doing bills and policies that, like the one that passed yesterday, shows that they don't necessarily actually care about you. And as a youth, having to deal with a government doing that, if you don't have family that shows up, it just compounds on top of each other.
Regina, you have been a social worker for years. You've worked with children in several different capacities. Some may think that you are the perfect person to learn that your child is transgender without maybe understanding the obstacles. How has it, I guess, what has the change been like for you going from social worker to parent?
I think that it's been a very informative experience, a very emotional experience. To your point, yes, I've been a social worker for a long time. And for most folks who know me, both personally and professionally, I think the response has been, okay, well, this must be great for you, actually, and you can support your kid, and you've got this. You've got this covered. And actually, at times there have been times, and sometimes continue to have times where there's no space for what the woman in the film talked about in terms of the grief, that you really experience this sense of loss about this child that and my son came out as trans at age 18. There's sort of an investment and this like life as I know it, and all of a sudden, all those things that I know and that I've sort of been, teaching and preaching as a social worker kind of go out the window, because it's a very different experience when it's your child and you feel responsible for their safety and their well-being. And isn't it all our goal as parents to make sure that your child has this, access to everything and great experience of life and can utilize their talents and have this impact, and then all of a sudden it doesn't quite feel the same way because this government and some of the other experiences and responses of the community or of society sort of puts a roadblock to that, and it becomes a very difficult challenge. So it's been a very informative year and a learning experience, and I have to say that the one I learned the most from is my son, who really has been very, very powerful and brave, and been able to sort of say, so here's how this goes, right? Because, for example, with the hormones, the first discussion of hormones, I was like, oh, no, we're not doing that. No way. That's crazy. This is a social worker. Like, that's not even ethically okay for me to say as a social worker, right? But then as a parent, being able to sort of say, okay, well, you better get some education on this, real education, as I would if there was any other sort of medication or medical situation that I had to sort of learn for my child, I needed to do the same thing. And so, I've had periods of being kind of embarrassed about how not in the know I am on various pieces of the transition, and how really important it is to get that information, even though you think that you know it, you really don't, to the extent you need to be there for your kid.
This is a sensitive question. We had a chance to talk earlier, so I know that people have asked you this question. I want to know how you respond to people who ask you, do you think that maybe this is just a phase?
So when I get that question, I am able to sort of pause in my head and say, okay, this is an opportunity for education, Regina, so let's, hold back a little bit. I will tell you that there have been times earlier in his transition where there's a piece of me in my head that says, oh God, I hope so, because this is so hard and I don't even understand half of this. And I'm going back now, before I was more educated and evolved, thanks to my son. But that's an opportunity to educate and to sort of say a little bit about, as you saw, genderbread man and the unicorn and all of that. There's different tools, and my son, who's here in the audience, sent that out to all the family, because this is not something that anyone in our family had any sort of context for. And that was really helpful, to literally send that with articles and say, let me follow up with a conversation about what this all means. What's the difference between orientation and identity and things like that? And so it's just an opportunity, I think, to educate and also to be able to sort of be open to that, because those of you that know me know that there are times where I'm going to jump all over that, but you really have to take this as an opportunity to teach people, because they really don't know. They really don't understand it. They have no context for it. I'm fortunate in the sense that, as is my spouse, who we've been doing this work with trans youth in the past for our whole careers, but that's not sort of some of the mainstream experiences of people in our family or of other people that we know. So it's really an opportunity to communicate and educate, and hopefully have some impact where they say, oh, well, all right, well, she's pretty okay, I guess, and so what she's telling me seems rational or reasonable, or just to get them to think about it, which is really the key piece.
Max's dad, Tom, who you saw in the piece, is a pastor at a church in Massachusetts, and we got to see their community and how they do have a supportive community. That's something we talked about earlier, but we didn't get to show in the film. Can you talk about how important it is to have a supportive community?
Yes, I think that we are, I live in a suburb in New Jersey that is one of the reasons that we moved there, plug, Maplewood, New Jersey. Very affirming, very diverse community. The LGBTQ community is part of the community. There's been same gender parents and couples raise their children there. It's a very sort of unique place. And I have to say, early on, there were pieces of the community, people in the community, who were almost more accepting and open to this than I was. And so when, for example, my son changed his name to Aiden, people would see me in town and just say, how's Aiden doing? And there'd be a piece of me going, who the hell is Aiden? What? And so that was so crucial, that for me as the parent to not be concerned about being ostracized, as this poor woman from Texas experienced. And our school district is very affirming. There's no issue of bathrooms. They took care of it, but long before this became something where the government was addressing it. And we feel very fortunate to be in such a progressive place with folks who it's like a non-issue. And for those who would see me, at certain times have a difficult time with it, or a different response, or be a little teary because of however I was feeling on that particular day, their response uniformly is, it's really fine. It's your kid. it's still your kid, you know. He's a great kid which is also piece of it is my kid happens to be great and has sort of, you know, blazed a path for himself long before this, and so. You know, I'm really we're very fortunate around that because that has made all the difference in the world because there was no issue at the lunch table. There was no issue with being embarrassed or conscious of, I mean, I know there was a consciousness around whether he was passing or not, but in our community, and that's a community of 23,000 people, it wasn't as hard perhaps because he knew, I think, that there was support all around in all, you know, from the block to the school to the town to the local businesses. I mean, it's kind of a freaky bubble place, but that made all the difference in the world, I think.
Nicole, how are Kai, Max, Stevie, and Charlotte doing?
They're all doing really well. I think with Kai and Max, they are still so young that a lot of what's happening at sort of the national political level, they hear it, but it's not totally sinking in. For Kai, she's been doing really well in kindergarten, although the issue of the bathroom is a big one. She has the nurse's room that she can go to, but there's not always somebody available right away to take her there. Sometimes the door is locked, and you can imagine for a 5-year-old, that is a huge problem. You need to go to the bathroom when you need to go. So it's definitely been a challenge for her in her first year of school. I think Max, as I'm sure you picked up on in the film, he's very funny. He's a very confident kid. I think he's really kind of stepping into his own. I think getting the blocker placed took off a lot of anxiety for him because he can just know now that these changes that he doesn't want aren't going to happen all of a sudden. Stevie, it's been a few months that he started testosterone and he's already starting to see some of the changes that he was looking for with his voice, with facial hair, but you know, he's 15 years old in high school. That's not an easy time for anybody. So I don't want to sugarcoat, you know, what there are challenges that come with that. Charlotte is actually getting ready to leave the house soon. So she started looking for apartments on her own. She's working while she's finishing up high school. But I think she's, I mean, even in the months that sort of passed between when we met her and then when we caught up with her later, I feel like you could just see a really big difference in her sort of being more relaxed, feeling more confident, just like she thought she would. So that was really great to see.
I think there will be people who will be inspired, especially with what's going on in Washington, that wouldn't usually be doing anything to support the trans community. Would anyone, and this is just an open question, is there anything that your sort of average citizen can do to help out, show their support? And I think this is going to be the last question, so any final thoughts?
I mean, something that I sort of discovered while we were working on this story is how the internet, in this case, can be a really great asset for people who are going through transitions or for their family members. Most people that we spoke to brought up different chat rooms or Facebook groups, places where they could turn, even if they were living in a place where they felt like there was no one around them who could support them. I think, you know, using your social media to advocate that you stand with trans rights, especially right now, is hugely important. Going to marches, going to any sort of local organizing that you can do, even if you live in you know, Massachusetts, where it, you know, for Max, it's a very accepting community for him. It's important just to show that you stand with the community and with the LGBT community.
Two things I would say in response to that. One, as a parent, to seek out other parents that that are going through the same experience that you are. I personally was able to connect with folks because my kid said, you know, you got to talk to Jack's mother, or my friend said, you know, I think I'm hearing from you the same I'm hearing from so-and-so's mother, because that connection to really feel like like an in-person, how many times I've had people on my porch for coffee or wine to say, what do we do? Like, what are you doing? How are you managing this? How's your kid managing it? How's the rest of the family managing it? And that connection, which sort of involves, some self-care around that. But the other piece, which we spoke about earlier today, is sort of being open to hearing from people that don't kind of get it. And even people that have really negative responses, to be open to say, so talk to me a little bit about why this is hard for you, because you can then utilize that opportunity to say, can we talk about peeing, right? It's just about peeing, or let's talk about what that experience for somebody is like if they're not, cisgender. And so being open to that, and being open to having the communication and sort of listening to some really sort of asinine thinking. Sorry, we're on HBO though, right? So, being really open to sort of ignorance, because you have an opportunity there to sort of educate a little bit at a time, and that's, we're in a time right now where that's hard to do. It's hard for folks who have different ideas about things to have conversations to educate one another, and we really need to hear what people's concerns are really, and what they're afraid of, because I do think a lot of it is fear, and to be able to take advantage of that opportunity, even if it's just a tiny window, to sort of educate a little. So that's the other thing I think we could do to be, sort of supportive.
I agree with all of you. I think showing up while not taking up space is really important. So showing up and showing support, but not making the fact that you showed up the center to the fact that you're there. I think we really need to highlight trans and gender nonconforming voices, specifically youth, because let's be real, youth know what's going on, they know what they need, and they know how they need it. And we can come up with all the ways to help people, but that doesn't actually do anything if we're not listening to someone saying, this is actually what I need. So I think that to be really stereotypical or whatever, the future belongs to the youth, and we need to listen to them because they're the ones that are creating it, and we just need to show up.
Well said. I think that's a great ender. Nicole, Ali, Regina, thank you so much for coming out, and everybody, thank you for joining us.